My husband slapped the divorce papers onto the dining table with a smug grin, thinking his timing was impeccable. He and his parasitic sister had already spent my year-end bonus in their heads. They had no idea I had spent the last 2 months quietly draining our joint accounts into trusts they could never touch. When his lawyer finally turns the page, that arrogance is going to curdle into absolute terror. My name is Mallory Hayes. At 38 years old, I had cultivated a reputation as the chief financial officer of Orion Data Systems, one of the premier tech giants in Seattle. My office on the 42nd floor was a fortress of glass and steel where I managed 9-figure budgets and navigated fiscal crises with surgical precision. But at home, my precision had apparently failed me. For the last 5 years, I had been the sole financier of my husband, Todd Vance. Todd liked to introduce himself at parties as a serial entrepreneur, a title that sounded impressive until one realized his series of ventures had yielded exactly $0 in profit. The dynamic in our house had shifted from unbalanced to suffocating with the arrival of Kayla, his younger sister. She had asked to stay for 2 weeks while she looked for a new apartment. That was 3 months ago. My home office, a sanctuary where I often worked late into the night, had been commandeered. It was now a chaotic studio of ring lights and cardboard boxes where Kayla screamed at her phone screen, hawking dubious diet teas and cheap jewelry to her followers. I sensed the shift in the atmosphere before I saw the proof. There were hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Todd stopped asking about my day and started asking more pointed questions about my vesting stock options. Instead of confronting him, I did what I always did in the boardroom. I gathered data. The revelation came on a rainy Tuesday while I was away on a business trip in San Francisco. Alone in my hotel room, I received a motion notification from the security camera in the living room. I usually ignored them, assuming it was just Kayla tripping over her inventory. But something made me open the app. The feed was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. Todd and Kayla were sitting on the beige sofa I had bought with my first promotion, clinking beer bottles. "You just have to be patient." "Todd," Kayla said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "When does the big check drop?" Todd took a long swig of beer before answering. "The fiscal year ends this month. The bonus hits her account in 3 weeks. It is going to be massive this year." "Kayla, enough to set us up for the launch. And then you file," she asked. "And then I file," Todd confirmed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Washington is a community property state. I get half. Plus, since she is the high earner and I have been supporting her career by managing the household, my lawyer says I can get alimony, maybe even for life." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the phone cold in my hand. Managing the household, Todd had not loaded a dishwasher in 2 years. Kayla laughed, a shrill sound that grated against my nerves. "God, she is so clueless. She thinks you are just stressed about the business. She is just a walking, talking ATM, a sad, old ATM." "Don't worry," Todd said, leaning back and putting his feet up on the coffee table. "Once I serve her the papers, we kick her out. I am keeping the house. You can turn the whole downstairs into your studio." "Finally," Kayla sighed. "I am so sick of stepping around her ugly suits." I waited for the tears. I waited for the heartbreak that novels told me I should feel. But I did not cry. Instead, a sensation of absolute zero washed over me. It was the same icy clarity I felt when I found a discrepancy in a financial audit. The man I had supported, loved, and carried on my back was not a partner. He was a liability, and liabilities had to be liquidated. I tapped the screen and hit the record button, saving the clip to a secure cloud drive. Then I opened my laptop. I did not log into my work email. Instead, I pulled up the joint bank account ledgers. I traced every transfer, every withdrawal, every coffee purchase. Then, I picked up my phone again. I did not call my mother. I did not call my best friend. I searched my contacts for a number I had saved years ago during a corporate merger, a woman known in Seattle legal circles as the Shark. I dialed. Law offices of Evelyn Sharp. A receptionist answered after the second ring. "This is Mallory Hayes," I said, my voice steady and devoid of tremors. "I need to book an emergency consultation with Evelyn. Tell her it involves a complex asset diversion. And a husband who thinks he is smarter than a CFO. 2 days later, I met Evelyn Sharp at a dimly lit coffee shop in the University District, far removed from the polished downtown firms where Todd might have spotted us. Evelyn did not look like a shoulder to cry on. She looked like a weapon. She flipped through the printouts of my financial records with the speed of a card shark, her eyes darting over the numbers. "He is sloppy," Evelyn said, tapping a highlighted column with her manicured fingernail. "But he is banking on the community property laws to save him. Here is the good news. The inheritance from your grandmother. You kept it in a separate high-yield savings account. Correct." "Yes," I replied, taking a sip of black coffee. I never commingled those funds. Not a single cent went into the joint checking. "Excellent," Evelyn said, a shark-like grin spreading across her face. "That remains yours. Untouchable. As for the rest, we need to be creative. If we can prove financial infidelity, we can freeze the marital assets before he files. Look here." She pointed to a series of transaction codes I had flagged the night before. They were small withdrawals, ranging from $50 to $200, occurring almost daily for the last 18 months. To the untrained eye, they looked like grocery runs or gas station fill-ups. But I had traced the merchant IDs. "Crypto exchanges," I said. "He is siphoning cash into a digital wallet he thinks I cannot see." "That is dissipation of marital assets," Evelyn confirmed. "It gives us the leverage we need to secure the rest. Move the liquid capital. Now." That afternoon, Operation Asset Migration began. I sat in my office at Orion Data Systems, locked the door, and went to work. I initiated a series of transfers that would have made a forensic accountant weep with joy. I opened a new trust account at a private bank called Ironclad Trust, using my maiden name and a different mailing address. Slowly, methodically, I moved the bulk of my personal savings, the emergency fund, and the dividends from my premarital investments into this new fortress. Todd had no signatory power at Ironclad Trust. He did not even know it existed. Next came the insurance policies. I logged into the provider's portal. For 5 years, Todd Vance had been the sole beneficiary of my life insurance and my retirement accounts. If I died, he would be a millionaire. I deleted his name. In the beneficiary field, I typed in the name of a local nonprofit organization dedicated to rehabilitating abused farm animals. If Todd wanted to live off my death, he was going to have to fight a goat sanctuary for the money. When I returned home that evening, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I slumped my shoulders and let my bags drag on the floor as I walked into the kitchen. Todd was eating takeout pizza while Kayla adjusted a ring light in the corner of the dining room. "Honey, are you okay?" Todd asked, though he didn't look up from his phone. "It is a nightmare at work." I sighed, rubbing my temples. The quarterly projections are down. I am terrified the board might cut bonuses this year to save face. We might have to tighten our belts for a few months. Todd exchanged a quick, panicked glance with Kayla. I knew exactly what he was thinking. If there was no bonus, his divorce payout would be significantly smaller. You're joking, right?" Todd stammered. "You promised that bonus was a sure thing." "Nothing is sure in this economy," I said, walking to the fridge. Emboldened by my apparent weakness, Kayla decided to stake her claim. The next evening, I came home to find a pile of my vintage architectural magazines and 2 of my blazers stuffed into a trash bag by the back door. Her cheap plastic inventory bins now occupied the shelves where my things had been. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the bag. "I needed space for the new product line," Kayla said, not even looking away from her phone screen. Those magazines were collecting dust anyway. You never read them. I looked at Todd. He shrugged, taking a bite of an apple. Don't be so selfish. Mallory, Kayla is trying to build a business. You should be supporting her, not hoarding space for old paper. Selfish. I repeated the word, tasting the irony. Right. I am the selfish one. I did not scream. I did not retrieve the bag. I simply took out my phone and snapped a photo of the trash bag, then a photo of the shelves filled with her junk. Then, I photographed the receipt for the pizza they had ordered on my secondary credit card. Every insult, every unauthorized purchase, every displaced item went into a digital dossier titled The Exit Strategy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the bank. I looked down at the screen, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile touched my lips. Ironclad Trust, incoming wire transfer of $450,000 successful. Asset transfer complete. The atmosphere in the house shifted from a cold war to an active skirmish. Todd needed a narrative for his lawyer, a story of a turbulent home life to justify the split. So he started picking fights over everything. If I loaded the dishwasher, I did it too loudly. If I left a light on, I was wasting his potential inheritance. It was pathetic, really. Then came the party. On a Thursday night, knowing I had a board meeting the next morning, Todd invited 5 of his loudest friends over for what he called strategy sessions. The bass from the speakers shook the floorboards. When I walked downstairs to ask them to lower the volume, Kayla accidentally knocked a glass of red wine onto the stack of financial reports I had left on the kitchen island. Oops, she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. Maybe you shouldn't leave your boring work stuff where people are trying to have fun. I watched the crimson liquid soak into the paper. A month ago, I would have scrambled to save the pages. I would have yelled. Now, I just walked to the sink, grabbed a roll of paper towels, and dabbed the mess. I looked at Todd, then at Kayla. They were waiting for an explosion. Instead, I looked through them as if they were transparent, as if they were already ghosts in my life. You are pathetic, Todd sneered, clearly unsettled by my silence. You don't even care anymore, do you? You are just empty. He mistook my detachment for defeat. He thought he had broken me. He had no idea I was just waiting for the ink to dry on the trust documents. 2 weeks later, the hammer fell. Or rather, Todd tried to drop the hammer, but it was made of foam. I walked into the kitchen to find a manila envelope sitting in the center of the dining table. Todd was sitting there, his head in his hands, practicing a look of deep, existential sorrow. Mallory, we need to talk, he said, his voice trembling with a rehearsed grief that would have been laughed off a community theater stage. I can't go on like this. I feel stifled. I have filed for divorce. I picked up the document, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. I flipped to the proposed settlement section. It was bold. I had to give him that. He was requesting exclusive possession of the marital residence because, as his lawyer noted, it was his primary place of business. He wanted 50% of all savings and investment accounts. And there it was, the cherry-on-top spousal support in the amount of $5,000 per month. Kayla stepped out from the hallway, unable to hide her grin. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. You should just sign it. Mallory, she chirped, Todd deserves it. He sacrificed the prime years of his life supporting your career. He deserves to be compensated for his lost youth. I looked at Todd. He was 39. His lost youth had been spent playing video games and failing at 4 different startups. I looked down at the papers again, my face a mask of absolute calm. I did not scream. I did not throw the papers in his face. I simply looked him in the eye. Todd, I said, my voice flat. Are you sure you want to make this move? Once we start this legal process, there is no going back. Todd straightened up, his fake sadness replaced by arrogance. I am sure. I know my rights. Mallory. Washington law protects the lower-earning spouse. You owe me. Okay, I said. I took a pen from my purse. I flipped to the page acknowledging receipt of the summons. I signed my name with a steady hand. I did not sign the settlement agreement. I did not agree to a single demand. I just acknowledged that the war had been declared. There, I said, placing the pen down. I have been served. I checked my watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. I have to get to work. I said, I have a meeting at 9. I picked up my briefcase and walked to the door. Behind me, I could hear Kayla giggle. See, she knows she lost, Kayla whispered to him. The house is ours. Todd, we are going to turn that office into the best studio ever. I closed the front door behind me, shutting out their celebration. They were toasting to a victory that had already been snatched away. As I started my car, I did not feel fear. I felt the satisfying click of a trap springing shut. The moment the court clerk stamped Todd's divorce petition, a digital tripwire I had installed weeks ago snapped into place. I was sitting in my office reviewing a merger proposal when my phone buzzed with the confirmation. The notification was silent, but the chaos it unleashed on the other side of town was deafening. Todd and Kayla had decided to celebrate their preemptive victory with a shopping spree at the most expensive furniture showroom in downtown Seattle. According to the transaction alerts that flooded my phone, they had selected a wandering Italian leather sectional to replace the sofa I had bought 3 years ago. That will be $6,400, the sales clerk said. I wasn't there, but I could picture the scene perfectly. Todd would have pulled out the platinum credit card, the one attached to my primary credit line, with a flourish of arrogance. He swiped. The machine beeped a harsh rejection tone. Try it again, Todd demanded. It must be the chip reader. It's always glitchy. The clerk tried again. Another beep, declined. Do you have another form of payment? The clerk asked. Todd pulled out the backup Visa. Declined. Then the emergency MasterCard. Declined. I can only imagine the shade of red his face turned as he stepped outside to call the bank, Kayla likely huffing beside him about the embarrassment. When he finally got a representative on the line, the news was delivered with corporate indifference. I am sorry, Mr. Vance, the agent said, but the primary account holder has removed all authorized users due to high-risk spending activity. The cards have been deactivated. They drove home in a sullen silence, only to find that the house was no longer the sanctuary they expected. When they walked through the door, the silence was literal. The high-speed fiber internet, the premium cable package, and every streaming subscription had been remotely disconnected. What is going on? Kayla shrieked from the living room. I can't go live. My followers are waiting for the unboxing video. I literally cannot work like this. But the real blow came 20 minutes later. Todd was in the driveway, trying to restart the router via his phone data, when a flatbed tow truck backed into our cul-de-sac. 2 men in jumpsuits hopped out and began hooking chains to the sleek black sedan Todd drove. It was a luxury company car, leased by Orion Data Systems for executive use. I had let him drive it as a favor. That favor had just expired. Hey, hey, Todd yelled, running down the driveway, waving his arms. What do you think you are doing? That is my car. Not according to the paperwork. Buddy, the driver said, not even pausing to look at him. This vehicle is the property of Orion Data Systems. We have a retrieval order signed by the CFO. It says the authorized driver status has been revoked effective immediately. As Todd watched his status symbol being dragged away in front of the neighbors, a metallic grinding sound came from the side of the house. Kayla sprinted toward the garage, screaming, No, stop. My inventory is in there. A locksmith was calmly finishing his work on the side door of the garage and the external storage unit. He tested the new key, the bolt sliding home with a solid, final thud. Ma'am, please step back, the locksmith said. I have been hired by the homeowner to secure the premises. These locks have been changed. But my stuff is in there, Kayla wailed, banging her fists against the metal door. You can't just lock me out of my own business, Todd. Now, realizing the ground was crumbling beneath his feet, pulled out his phone to call me. I saw the call come in. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I blocked the number. A few seconds later, his phone pinged with an email. It wasn't from me. It was an automated response from the server of Evelyn Sharp. Dear Mr. Vance, please be advised that I now represent Ms. Hayes in all legal and personal matters. All future communication must be directed to my office. Any further attempts to contact my client directly will be considered harassment and documented for the court. Do not test us. Todd stood in the driveway, the tow truck disappearing around the corner, his sister pounding on a locked door, and his phone useless in his hand. For the first time in 5 years, the fog of his arrogance began to clear, revealing the terrifying reality of his position. He had thought he was fighting a grieving wife. He was just beginning to realize he had declared war on a CFO who knew exactly how to balance the books. I moved into one of the executive suites Orion Data Systems maintained for visiting consultants. It was a glass-walled sanctuary on the 35th floor, overlooking the Puget Sound. For the first time in 5 years, I woke up to silence. There was no television blaring sports commentary at 7 in the morning, no Kayla screaming at her phone ring light about engagement metrics. Just the hum of the HVAC system and the taste of expensive espresso. I felt lighter, as if I had shed 100 pounds of dead weight, but the silence was merely the eye of the storm. Across town, the legal machinery was grinding into gear. Todd had retained a lawyer named Barry, a man whose billboards I had seen near the highway exits promising quick cash for injury claims. Barry decided to start our engagement with a threat. He called Evelyn's office on a secure line, his voice booming through the speakerphone as I sat across from Evelyn's mahogany desk. "This is economic violence. Ms." Sharp Barry shouted, clearly performing for an audience of one terrified husband on his end. "Your client has maliciously cut off my client's access to basic necessities. We are filing an emergency motion for immediate relief and sanctions. We want the cards reactivated and a cash advance of $10,000 by noon." Evelyn did not shout back. She did not even lean forward. She simply pressed a button on her intercom. "Send the courier to Barry's office," she said calmly. Then she turned her attention back to the speakerphone. "Barry, before you file anything that might embarrass you in front of a judge, I suggest you open the package that just arrived at your reception desk. We call it Exhibit A." We waited in silence for 3 minutes. I imagined Barry ripping open the heavy box. Inside lay a 3-inch binder titled Evidence of Marital Asset Embezzlement. "What is this?" Barry asked, his bluster replaced by confusion. "That," Evelyn said, her voice cutting like a diamond saw, "is a forensic accounting of where the money actually went. You claim your client is a victim. The numbers say he is a thief." I leaned toward the microphone, turned to tab 4. "Barry, you will see a series of withdrawals totaling $42,000 over the last 18 months. Todd told me he was investing in a tech startup. The bank records show he transferred those funds to an unregulated cryptocurrency exchange. The current value of those assets is approximately $14.50. There was a choking sound on the other end of the line. Now turn to tab 6. I continued. "The house. Todd claims it is a marital asset. However, the down payment and the mortgage payments were made exclusively from the Margaret Hayes Inheritance Trust, under state law, because I never commingled those funds with our joint accounts. The property remains separate. Todd does not own the house. He is a guest who has overstayed his welcome." Evelyn took over, flipping through her own copy of the binder. "And finally, Barry, look at the section marked Unauthorized Gifts. Your client has transferred nearly $20,000 to his sister, Kayla, under the guise of loans that were never repaid. That is community money he gave away without spousal consent. We are characterizing that as theft." I could practically hear Barry sweating through his cheap suit. He had taken this case thinking he would get a quick settlement from a wealthy executive wife. Instead, He was staring at a complex financial fraud case where his client was the perpetrator. I was not aware of the crypto accounts. Barry stammered. Todd, you said those were business expenses. They were. Todd's voice cracked in the background, high and desperate. I was going to double our money. The market crashed. It was gambling with family funds, Evelyn corrected him. Here is our counteroffer. Barry, we are demanding a full forensic audit of all expenditures for the last 3 years. Todd will explain every steak dinner, every video game, and every dollar sent to his sister. If he cannot justify it as a legitimate household expense, half of that debt comes out of his share of the remaining assets. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Todd had expected a payday. He was slowly realizing that by the time I was done balancing the ledger, he wouldn't be receiving a check. He would be writing one. He owes the marital estate, I said, closing my notebook, and I intend to collect. The mediation was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning at Evelyn's pristine downtown office. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Todd's first car. I had spent the morning at the salon, not for vanity, but for armor. My hair was blown out to perfection, my makeup flawless. I did not look like a woman mourning a marriage. I looked like a CEO closing a merger. When Todd arrived, the contrast was brutal. He looked like he had aged a decade in 2 weeks. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he carried the stench of stale anxiety. Kayla was trailing behind him, looking like an angry badger in a fast-fashion tracksuit, arguing loudly with the receptionist about her right to be there as his emotional support manager. She stays outside, Evelyn said, standing in the doorway of the conference room. Her voice brokered no argument. Client and counsel only. If she steps 1 foot inside, the meeting is over, and we see you in court. Todd mumbled something to Kayla, who shot daggers at me through the glass partition before slumping into a waiting room chair. Todd shuffled into the room and sat opposite me. He refused to meet my eyes. Let's begin, Evelyn said, placing a single sheet of paper on the table. Todd cleared his throat. He looked up, his eyes wet with performative tears. Mallory, I don't understand how we got here. You are being so cold, so heartless. We have 5 years of history. I loved you. I still love you. Can't we just talk about this like husband and wife, instead of enemies? You are destroying me over money. Since when did you become so cruel? I felt a flash of old guilt, the reflex to comfort him. But then I remembered the security footage. I remembered the laughter. Cruel? I asked, my voice level. Todd, do you remember the Tuesday before I left for San Francisco? I don't know, he stammered. What does that have to do with anything? I pulled out my tablet and placed it in the center of the table. I tapped the screen. The audio was loud enough to fill the room. She is just a walking, talking ATM. A sad, old ATM. Once I serve her the papers, we kick her out. I am keeping the house. The color drained from Todd's face so fast I thought he might faint. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. It was a fish gasping for air on a dock. His lawyer, Barry, listened to the recording with a look of profound resignation. When the clip ended, Barry slowly closed the file folder in front of him. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He knew the game was over. There was no spinning this. There was no emotional distress claim he could file that would survive that recording. Here is the offer, I said, sliding the single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It is a one-time offer. You have 48 hours to vacate my house. You will sign the uncontested divorce decree today. You will waive all rights to spousal support, now and forever. You will waive any claim to my retirement accounts and the house. But I have nowhere to go, Todd whispered, his arrogance dissolved into panic. Mallory, I can't. I have debts. That brings me to the second part. I continued. If you do not sign this right now, I will file a civil suit for fraud and embezzlement regarding the funds you stole for your crypto wallet. Furthermore, my forensic accountant found some interesting discrepancies in how you filed your taxes for your consulting business for the last 3 years. You claimed losses you didn't have to offset the money you were skimming. If we don't settle today, I send that entire packet to the IRS. Todd looked at Barry. Barry didn't look back. He just handed Todd a pen. Sign it. Todd, Barry said quietly. You do not want to fight this. You will go to prison. Todd's hand shook so violently that the pen rattled against the table. He looked at me one last time, searching for the pushover wife he used to know. She wasn't there. With a sob that sounded like a whimpering dog, he signed the papers. As we walked out of the conference room, Kayla jumped up from her chair. She marched toward me, her finger pointed at my face. You witch, she screamed, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. You think you can just bully him? I am going to tell everyone. We are going to. I stopped and turned to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You have 48 hours, too. Kayla, I said, looking her dead in the eye. After that, anything left in that house, your ring lights, your inventory, your clothes goes to the Salvation Army. I am changing the locks at exactly noon on Friday. Don't test me. She froze, her mouth hanging open. The realization hit her just as it had hit her brother. The free ride was over. I walked past them to the elevator, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. Behind me, I heard Todd sobbing, a broken sound of a man who realized too late that he had bet against the house and lost everything. 48 hours later, the deadline arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch. I did not come alone to oversee the eviction. I hired a private security detail, 2 men the size of linebackers who stood by the front door with their arms crossed, silent sentinels ensuring that my property remained my property. The house felt tense, vibrating with the chaotic energy of 2 people who were not used to being told no. Kayla was in the living room, throwing items into cardboard boxes with violent force. As she dragged a heavy metal chair toward the door, I heard the sickening screech of steel digging into the Brazilian walnut floors I had installed 2 years ago. Oops, she said, not bothering to look at me, her voice dripping with venom. My hand slipped. She reached for the silk drapes in the hallway, the ones custom-made in Italy, and yanked them hard enough to tear the fabric from the rod. Stop right there, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I nodded to the security guard, who held up a body camera that had been recording since we walked in. Everything you break is being documented. The cost of refinishing these floors and replacing those drapes is coming out of the final settlement. Or rather, it is adding to the debt Todd already owes me. Kayla froze, her hand still gripping the torn fabric. She looked at the camera, then at me, realizing that her temper tantrum came with a price tag she could not afford. She dropped the curtain and stormed out to the moving truck. In the den, Todd was trying to disconnect the 65-inch OLED television from the wall mount. He had also stacked the surround sound speakers and the gaming console I had bought him for Christmas by the door. I am taking this, Todd grunted, wrestling with the HDMI cables. It was a gift. It is mine. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a file folder. I extracted a single sheet of paper, the receipt from Best Buy, dated 3 years ago, with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. Actually, I said, holding the paper up for him to see, I bought this. The credit card statement is attached. It is considered household furnishing purchased by the primary earner. Put it down, or I call the police and report a theft in progress. The officers are already on speed dial. Todd, do you really want to be arrested in front of the neighbors? Todd stared at the receipt, his face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. He looked at the TV, then at the security guard who had taken a step forward. With a defeated sigh, he let go of the screen. You are unbelievable, he stammered, his voice cracking. I hope you rot in this big, empty house. I will take my chances. I replied. The departure was a pathetic parade. When Kayla had arrived months ago, she had strutted in with Louis Vuitton luggage and an air of entitlement. Now, she and Todd were dragging black trash bags and cheap, bulging cardboard boxes down the driveway. The neighbors, who had endured their loud parties and rude behavior for months, were watching from their porches. No one waved. No one offered to help. Mrs. Higgins across the street actually took a sip of her iced tea and watched with visible satisfaction. As soon as the taillights of their rented moving van disappeared around the corner, I turned to the locksmith who was waiting by the garage. "Do it," I said. He drilled out the old core and installed a smart lock with a new keypad in less than 10 minutes. I programmed the code myself, a sequence of numbers only I would know. The mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. Then, the cleaning crew arrived. I had hired a team of industrial cleaners, the kind usually reserved for crime scenes or hazardous waste removal. I pointed them toward the guest room, the space Kayla had turned into her personal sty. "Scrub everything," I ordered. "I want the carpets deep cleaned. I want the walls washed. If there is a single speck of glitter or a lingering scent of cheap vanilla perfume left in this house by sunset, I will be disappointed." I stood in the hallway as they worked. The sharp, chemical smell of industrial bleach and fresh lemon began to rise, overpowering the stale odor of failure that had permeated my home. It was not just a cleaning, it was an exorcism. I watched the gray water being sucked out of the carpets and felt a profound sense of lightness. The parasites were gone. The host was finally healing. News travels faster than fiber optic cables in a city like Seattle, especially when it involves the spectacular implosion of a social climber. I did not have to lift a finger to ruin Todd's reputation. I simply stepped back and let gravity take its course. I heard through the grapevine that Todd and Kayla had landed in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex 45 minutes south of the city. It was the kind of place with thin walls and a lingering scent of stale cigarette smoke in the hallways, a far cry from the architectural digest aesthetic Kayla had tried to curate in my living room. Without my salary to subsidize their delusions of grandeur, reality hit them with the force of a freight train. The internet, usually a tool for Kayla's vanity, became her judge and jury. Some of her sharp-eyed followers noticed the sudden change in her background during her erratic live streams. They dug up old videos where she bragged about her house and her success, juxtaposing them with her current reality of peeling wallpaper and bad lighting. The comment section turned brutal. "Wait, I thought she owned that mansion," one user commented. "Turns out she was just crashing at her brother's ex-wife's place." Exposed. Todd fared no better. His so-called startup, which I had unknowingly kept afloat by covering all his living expenses, collapsed within weeks. It turned out that bootstrapping is impossible when you have no boots and no straps. The minor investors he had charmed with promises of high returns began demanding their money back. When he couldn't pay, they didn't sue him. They just made sure everyone on LinkedIn knew he was a liability. Desperation makes people sloppy. I started seeing missed calls from unknown numbers on my office line. When that didn't work, emails trickled into my spam folder. "Mallory, please." One subject line read, "I just need a bridge loan. $5,000. I will pay you back with interest." I deleted it without opening it. Without me as their common enemy and provider, the alliance between Todd and Kayla fractured. A mutual acquaintance told me they had been seen screaming at each other in the parking lot of a discount grocery store. "You said she would fold," Todd had apparently yelled, slamming his hand on the hood of his rusted sedan. "You said she was weak." Now I am broke because I listened to you. Don't blame me because you couldn't keep your wife happy. Kayla had screamed back, "You are a loser." Todd, that is why she dumped you while they were tearing each other apart over overdue rent and grocery bills. I was ascending. The board of directors at Orion Data Systems took notice of my increased focus. With the distractions at home removed, I navigated the company through a complex fiscal quarter with record-breaking efficiency. By the start of the next month, the CEO called me into his office and offered me the position of executive vice president. To celebrate, I didn't book a table at a flashy restaurant to be seen. I invited 6 of my closest friends over to the house, the ones who had known me before Todd, the ones who had never liked him but supported me anyway. We sat in the living room, which was finally furnished with pieces I loved: a velvet armchair, a solid oak coffee table, and art that spoke to me, not to a trend. The air smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary, not tension. We drank wine and laughed until our sides ached, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to cleanse the walls of the bad memories. Sarah, a friend from my college days, swirled her glass and looked at me with a sympathetic smile. "I heard about Todd," she said quietly. "Someone told me he is driving for a rideshare app now. He looks terrible." "Mallory, do you ever feel bad for him?" The room went quiet. I looked down at my wine, watching the light catch the deep red liquid. I thought about the man who had planned to leave me with nothing, the man who had laughed while his sister called me an ATM. "No," I said, looking up with a smile that was entirely peaceful. "That is not my story anymore. I am just the audience now, and honestly, I stopped watching that channel a long time ago. I realized then that the greatest revenge wasn't in the legal victory or the financial ruin I had orchestrated. It was the simple biological fact that parasites cannot survive without a host. I had simply removed myself from the equation, and in doing so, I had let them destroy themselves. The transformation of my home did not happen overnight, but every change felt like a reclaiming of territory that had been occupied by enemy forces. For 5 years, I had deferred to Todd's taste, which could best be described as bachelor pad chic mixed with impulsive consumerism. I had lived with oversized leather recliners I hated and neon beer signs he insisted were ironic art. Now, I sent it all to a consignment shop. In their place, I brought in what I had always wanted. I painted the walls a soft, calming sage green. I bought a dining table made of reclaimed wood that felt solid and permanent beneath my fingertips. But the most significant project was the downstairs guest room, the space Kayla had turned into her chaotic warehouse. I spent a weekend stripping the room bare. I replaced the scratched flooring and installed floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. In the center, I placed a thick yoga mat and a meditation cushion. What was once a source of constant noise and stress had become a sanctuary of absolute silence. When I stepped into that room now, I didn't smell Kayla's cloying vanilla body spray. I smelled old paper and beeswax candles. With the physical space cleared, I turned my attention to the digital one. I sat down with my laptop one rainy Sunday afternoon to review my monthly financial statements. The difference was staggering. Without Todd's daily siphoning of funds for business lunches and Kayla's unauthorized use of my credit lines, my savings rate had increased by nearly 40% in just 3 months. I stared at the numbers, realizing how expensive my fear of being alone had actually been. I had paid a premium for the illusion of a partnership. It was a lesson that had seared itself into my bones. I would never again merge my identity or my assets so completely that I lost track of where I ended and another person began. Love, I realized, should not require a forensic accountant to manage. The final severance came on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang while I was arranging fresh hydrangeas in a vase on the kitchen island. It was Evelyn. "It is done. Mallory," Evelyn said, her voice professional but warm. "The judge signed the final decree this morning. The clerk just stamped it. You are officially a single woman. Todd has no legal claim to you, your property, or your future earnings. He is just a name in your past now." "Thank you." "Evelyn," I said, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for half a decade. "For everything." "Go celebrate," she said. "You earned it." I did not go out to a club. I did not call a crowd of people. Instead, I opened a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that I had been saving for a special occasion. I poured a glass and walked into the living room. I sat on my new velvet sofa, tucked my legs under me, and just listened. I put on a jazz record, low and smooth, the saxophone weaving through the air like smoke. There was no sports commentary blaring from the TV. There was no Kayla complaining about her lighting. There was no Todd asking where his clean socks were while I was trying to finish a report. There was just me. I looked around the room, letting my eyes rest on the shadows and the light. A few months ago, the thought of this solitude would have terrified me. I had stayed in a draining marriage because I was afraid of the empty space, afraid of being the woman who failed at having it all. But as I took a sip of the wine, tasting the rich notes of dark cherry and oak, I realized that the empty space wasn't empty at all. It was full of peace. I was no longer the Mallory who walked on eggshells in her own foyer. I was no longer the walking ATM or the nagging wife. I was the owner of this house, the owner of my time, and for the first time in a long time, the owner of my own happiness. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. I didn't need to apologize for the silence. I didn't need to ask a permission to enjoy it. This was the true settlement, the asset that no lawyer could quantify. It was the absolute, non-negotiable freedom to be exactly who I was, in a home that finally felt like a reflection of my soul rather than a cage. It had been 6 months since the ink dried on the final divorce decree. I was standing in the center of the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons, holding a crystal flute of champagne. The room was filled with the city's elite, gathered for the annual charity gala that Orion Data Systems was sponsoring. I was wearing a silk gown that fit like a second skin, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged in it. I was not just a +1 or a supportive wife standing in the shadows. I was the executive vice president, the host, the woman everyone wanted to meet. Then, I saw him. Todd was near the buffet table, and the sight of him was almost jarring. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 6 months. His suit, which used to be crisp and tailored on my dime, was ill-fitting and wrinkled at the elbows. He was cornering an uncomfortable-looking tech investor, waving his hands frantically as he pitched some delusion of a business idea. The investor looked around for an escape route, and when he saw me, he nodded politely and practically ran away, leaving Todd talking to the air. Todd turned, scanning the room for his next target, and his eyes locked onto mine. I saw the recognition hit him, followed immediately by a flash of calculation. He took in my dress, the diamond earrings I had bought for myself, and the circle of influential people waiting to speak to me. He straightened his tie, smoothed back his thinning hair, and began to weave through the crowd toward me. It was pathetic. He actually thought he could charm his way back in. He thought he could play the victim, or perhaps the nostalgic ex-husband, to get a foothold back into the life he had thrown away. I did not run. I did not hide behind my colleagues. I stood perfectly still, sipping my champagne, and waited for him to come to me. He stopped 2 feet away, smelling of stale anxiety and cheap cologne. He put on that familiar puppy dog expression that used to make me open my checkbook, Mallory. He began, his voice cracking slightly. "You look incredible. I have missed you so much. Look, I know I made mistakes, but seeing you tonight, it is a sign. I think I raised a single finger. It was a small gesture, but it silenced him instantly. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was cold enough to freeze the air between us. "But, honey," he stammered, reaching out a hand as if to touch my arm. "I am struggling here. Kayla and we are really having a hard time. If you could just—" I took a half step back, avoiding his touch as if he were contagious. I looked him up and down, not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a CEO reviewing a failed quarterly report. "Todd, listen to me very closely. I said, looking him dead in the eye. You were a bad investment that I successfully cut my losses on. Do not devalue my stock with your presence ever again. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The brutality of the truth hit him harder than any scream could have. He stood there, frozen, realizing that the Bank of Mallory was not just closed, it had been demolished. I turned my back on him. I didn't need to see his reaction. A moment later, I heard the polite but firm voice of the head of security behind me. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private event for ticket holders only. I walked toward the French doors that led to the balcony. The night air was cool and smelled of rain and pine. I stepped out, away from the noise of the party, and walked to the stone railing. Below me, the city of Seattle was a grid of glittering lights, alive and pulsing with energy. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh air. There was no heaviness in my chest. There was no fear of what the future held. I had dismantled the life that was draining me and built a new one on a foundation of self-respect. I raised my glass toward the skyline, a silent toast to the woman I had become. I was alone. Yes, but I was whole. The past was a closed ledger, and my future was an open market with infinite potential. I smiled, took a sip of the champagne, and turned back to face the room, ready for whatever came next. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help share this story with more people.